As a comic reviewer, I got to cover everything. But DC Comics holds like a special place in my heart. That's really my universe. That's really big and sweeping and epic, and it has my flavor as superhero. At least it has in the past. And I understand we're never going to get back to DC Comics Rebirth, where we had the best versions of the best heroes in one universe telling awesome, hopeful stories for a very, very long time, all interconnected, leading to things that felt like they were going to be enormous. Of course, a lot of those enormous things didn't really pan out. I like Doomsday Clock. It's not even in continuity anymore because they decided to go down a more dark route. And as they've gone down this darker route and getting away from DC Rebirth, they've just become basically Marvel Comics light. They have no identity at this point. What separates DC Comics from Marvel Comics? What makes them an alternative to the market leader at this point? And it's really nothing. It's the same writers, it's the same stories, it's the same sales gimmicks that Marvel Comics are using. Marvel Comics are doing a thing where they're writing stories in continuity, but 30 years ago and stuff like that. DC Comics are basically following down the same path. Not that it's a bad idea. I like those series from Marvel Comics, but DC's not doing anything different. Marvel Comics used to have oodles and oodles of variant covers when DC Comics only had an A cover and a B cover. You had the A cover that was the primary and the B cover that was a piece of pretty badass art. Didn't really have anything to do with the story, but if you were a collector and you wanted something that just looked cool, you got the B cover. Does DC Comics have an A to B cover? No, they've got a C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P cover at this point because they got to go through all the same stupid gimmicks that Marvel Comics have done to really drive people off. And we do get some longer runs at DC, but they're also doing lots more miniseries at this point. They're doing a lot more reboots. We're about to have an enormous, basically line-wide reboot, which I don't think will be successful like DC Comics Rebirth. I think it'll be more the same writers, the same shell game, moving these jabronis around that have been driving people off that don't understand what really separates DC Comics from Marvel. Marvel's a little bit more grounded. Their characters are a lot more flawed. DC Comics is a more hopeful universe. Their heroes, by and large, are much more like gods. Are they perfect? Damn near close to it. A lot of them, at least. Certainly you do have your Batman, which would kind of make more sense in a Marvel-style universe, and you have your Green Arrows and stuff like that. But a lot of times you got your Superman, you got your Wonder Woman, you have these big, epic, sweeping characters that are very, very powerful, and sometimes you would say overpowered, and I don't think that's a bad thing. It was an alternative to Marvel, and there is no alternative to Marvel Comics. For some reason, DC has decided to just follow down the path of destruction and burning down everything so they could be like them. And I don't get it. Even when they have a cool idea that feels like it's going to separate them or offer something different from what Marvel Comics do. Certainly Vertigo was enormous for a very long time. Remember when they did the Vertigo relaunch? It basically died before they ever released a book. What did they turn Vertigo into? SJW DC Comics. They went out of their way to hire the worst writers possible. They put the worst editor possible over the line, let him manage it. And it didn't even last like 6 months before it died because that's not what DC Comics Vertigo was. After that, we were supposed to get Black Label. The very best writers, the very best artists working in tandem out of continuity, which I would prefer it to be in continuity, but I'll take the best creative possible together with the best heroes doing stories with no strings attached, more adult level stories, stuff like that. What the fuck is even DC Comics Black Label anymore? Apparently they stubbed their foot right out the gate when we had the Batawang or the Bat Dong or whatever you want to call it. And all of a sudden Black Label was just, I don't know, the storage facility for stuff that didn't make sense elsewhere. And it certainly wasn't the best writers with the best artists. It got watered down almost immediately. You had weird stuff that didn't have anything to do with DC heroes. And recently we got a book called The Boy Wonder. It's obviously a Robin book, mostly Damian Wayne. And it's basically like a life story of Damian Wayne and his relationship with his father and what he learned from his brothers and all that stuff. We've had one issue out. It's DC Black Label. It's basically a kid's book. It's an all ages comic book. It's something that I can enjoy with my 8-year-old. And there's nothing wrong with that. I love reading comic books with my kid. That's a whole lot of fun. But when I see DC Black Label, or at least I thought it was established, that it was like a Max label or something like that, where it was very much adult oriented, lots of cursing, lots of sex, violence, blood, and all that kind of stuff. And you open this DC Black Label book about Damian Wayne, and it's something that you could sell to 5-year-olds. It's a good book. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's not Black Label, or at least what I thought Black Label was. I don't think DC Comics know who they are anymore. Guess what we're having return this year? DC Elseworld stories. Been a staple of DC Comics for decades upon decades. A lot of their most valued trades, the stories that don't go out of print, are DC Elseworld stories, or at least started there, and sometimes they get folded into continuity. But if you have Elseworlds, why do you need Black Label? I thought that was the repository for that kind of stuff. But they're going to have both? Like, what is even the point? I think the point is Jim Lee just doesn't care about business. I don't think it's that he doesn't care about comic books. I think Jim Lee loves comic books. He's been in the industry for a very, very long time. You know, we're talking like 30, 40 years at this point. He's done some wildly innovative stuff, you know, with the business aspects of it, with Wildstorm eventually being acquired from DC Comics. And certainly, he's an artist worth remembering. He's somebody that should be on the Mount Rushmore of comic book art. Jim Lee is a fucking legend. But at this point, Jim Lee is so checked out, it's not even funny. You know, we had a term for it when I was in the military. It was called retired on active duty, where you drop your paperwork, you were clear to retire, maybe you had 6 months to go, and the guy just didn't do shit anymore. But that's what Jim Lee's been doing, not for 6 months, for like 2 or 3 years now. Ever since Dan Didio left, there's been this enormous vacuum of leadership at DC Comics to where they don't have an identity. They don't have a path to go. They don't have a strategy on anything. It's just Jim Lee going out there on the red carpet and flexing his bona fides as a star and all that kind of stuff, which is great. You know, I like crossover people. I like the fact that there are people that aren't into comic books that know who Jim Lee is. But the fact is, DC Comics suck right now. And I think not having leadership at DC Comics really is putting them in a tough position to be not the market leader. They're never going to be Marvel Comics. Maybe they'll outsell them for 3 months, maybe even 6 months, with a really good initiative that actually brings people back with really good creative. But Marvel are going to be the market leader. But DC Comics needs to be something too. It needs to be a viable alternative. It needs to be a hopeful universe. It needs to be something different than whatever Marvel is doing, but they keep going down the same path. And you know, when Jim Lee not saying anything about fucking Ed Piskor pisses me off. It upsets me to my fucking bones. This dude is a legend within the comic book industry. He's seen a lot of dirty stuff happen within comic books. He is a fucking leader. He's not fat boy CB Cebulski over at Marvel Comics worrying about what his dumpling lunch is going to be this week. He's not Tom Brevoort in the fucking pig pie hat and all that kind of shit. He's not Dan Buckley, who doesn't know what's going on. He's somebody that people would listen to if he actually wanted to say something. But there is no leadership ability apparently at Jim Lee left. I think he is just completely checked out and didn't even care enough that a member of the fraternity, somebody that was out there championing comic books, getting the word out there, was unfairly bullied, was unfairly maligned, killed himself. And now they're out there honoring the people that he identified as his killers. Jim Lee's got nothing to say because I guess it just didn't matter to him. Whatever. I guess if he didn't want to jump into the controversy, it definitely appears that Jim Lee does not like being a part of controversy because he was too busy shepherding the DC Comics line. I could almost understand it. But fucking Batman sucks. If there's one character at DC Comics associated with Jim Lee, it is Batman. Why doesn't he care that Batman is not a good title right now? Every once in a while, we will get a decent issue from Chip Zdarsky. We get great art from Jorge Jimenez, but we get terrible storytelling almost across the board. Go read Detective Comics. It's just been sitting there fucking squatting for like 2 years under Rampy. And I was excited for Rampy. I was like, you know, a new voice. He's got a specific style. Maybe this will actually fit for Batman. It will definitely feel different than the flagship Batman title. And he's just been telling the same exact story for 2 years. Where's Jim Lee to tell somebody, hey, get this dude out of the fucking mud and moving forward? We can't just sit here and do nothing with the title as the sales decline. You know, the other big solo title out there that should be good under DC Comics has been a consistent seller for decades upon decades is The Flash. The Flash was actually in a pretty damn good place. You know, it's coming up to the end of Rebirth with Josh Williamson. He did not stick the landing, although the last couple issues were okay, but Flash War absolutely sucked, and he did kind of wear out his welcome there. But The Flash was still selling at that point. Tom King comes in, destroys the character, and he has not been able to recover since. They started to recover the character a little bit, and now he's in no man's land once again. All their major stuff outside of Superman just isn't very good right now. Why haven't we had a fucking Justice League comic book for 2 years? That is ridiculous. That is your number one comic book superhero team. Well, we got to elevate the Titans. Well, how are you going to elevate the Titans? Jim Lee should have been asking that question to Tom fucking Taylor. What are you going to do to let people know that the Titans are just as important and powerful as the Justice League? And when he said, well, I'm going to send to South America and we're going to plant trees and fight pollution, he should have said, fuck you very much. I'm going to actually hire a comic book superhero writer that wants to tell a story that highlights the Titans and what makes them amazing. Why they are the heir apparent to the Justice League. Why, when they're on their A game, you might not need a Justice League. They never established that. They just act like they was so because they put Tom Taylor on the book. Apparently, the Justice League will be coming back under Mark Waid and Dan Mora, which is good news, I guess, if you like Mark Waid. When he hunkers down and just works on the comic books and doesn't say anything, whatever. Mark Waid is a good writer. At DC Comics, he's better than a good writer. He's a damn good writer. But every once in a while, Mark Waid just has to go out there, jump into a controversy, open his big fucking mouth, and remind people why he's so wholly unlikable as a person, why you shouldn't support him. Yes, I would rather see the industry burn down than Mark Miller write a fucking Superman comic book. Go fuck yourself, Mark Waid. Yes, you've done some big work. Kingdom Come is great. You know, I like Birthright. You had a great Flash run. But you aren't fucking Alan Moore. You're not Stan Lee. You're not Jack Kirby. You're not even Jim Lee. How about you just put out some good comic books and not alienate the fans themselves and remind them why they shouldn't be supporting you, which is a big problem because he's the big architect for Absolute Power. Yes, they've got another event coming up. Shockingly, another DC Comics event. Remember when DC Comics did one or maybe two events in a year? And they would do some crossover stuff that was really high quality and lots of fun, always leading up to something big. And you got Blackest Night, you got some really cool events like that. We haven't gotten anything like that for a very long time. Nobody even notices when DC Comics have an event anymore. I would say Titans Beast World, because the Titan series did suck. Beast World was actually good. As an event, pretty good. Don't read the Titans tie-ins because those suck, but Beast World itself was good. Had a lot of fun art in it, had some cool stuff going on there. Nobody fucking bought it because nobody is buying DC Comics right now because it's a weak-ass brand. Nobody cares about their events. Why don't they care about their events? Because Jim Lee is asleep at the wheel. Yeah, let's do Night Terrors. Let's shut down the entire line at the very beginning of our new initiative and remind people that they shouldn't go to their comic book shop every single Tuesday and pick up our books. Let's do Lazarus Planet, where we'll start out with one story by a writer and end it with another story by that writer, and we'll have a bunch of shitty writers in the middle water down and ruin everything. Let's do Dark Crisis on Infinite Earths with Josh Williamson, who can't write a fucking event series for his entire life and just fuck up the end of whatever Infinite Frontier was. Their events suck ass. There's a good chance, very good chance, that Absolute Power is actually going to be good. They have been leading up to it. Amanda Waller has been everywhere for over a year now. They certainly have had the Batman of Zur-En-Arrh now in Failsafe has been leading up for like 18, 24 months, something like that. And, you know, we just got the big reveal, the Brainiac Queen and House of Brainiac. All events that are leading up to Absolute Power, and Mark Waid is actually a good writer. Nobody's going to fucking care because people have checked out on DC Comics under Jim Lee. They need new leadership. You can't do the Marvel method if nobody actually gives a fuck that you're doing an event. It does not pop the needle anymore because they've destroyed the DC Comics universe itself. There is no hope in the DC Comics universe. There's only despair. Probably because they brought in people like Tom King. Tom King, probably a nice guy, got some mommy issues. What should we do? Let's let him single-handedly destroy the symbol of hope in the DC Comics universe in Rebirth. Let's let him destroy Wally West. Well, what else can he destroy? Let's let him destroy Batman and the popularity that was going on there. Well, what else can he destroy? Let's let him destroy Mr. Terrific and Adam Strange, characters that are not big sellers and can't handle something like Tom King destroying their character. What's going on right now with Wonder Woman? Destroying the character. You just destroys everybody, but he's their number one writer. Can't get away from him. And I understand Tom King has a history. You know, his mother was an executive at Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers Discovery now does own DC Comics. But come on, you got to protect the line. You've got to do something to separate this universe. And going down the path of Marvel was the worst idea ever. Not realizing what made Superman special, what made Wally West Flash special, what makes Wonder Woman special, what made the Justice League special. Removing the heart and soul of everything at the core components of DC Comics, throwing it on the wayside so you could be more like Marvel Comics, was the worst idea ever. You know, the Bendis thing. What the fuck was Dan Didio thinking? Bringing over Brian Michael Bendis, coming after a string of failures. Civil War II should have been enough for you to know maybe he's not primetime Brian Michael Bendis. And I understand Marvel have typically outsold DC Comics, and I don't think that'll ever change. I've been told specifically Dan Didio went out and hired Brian Michael Bendis and gave him a whole lot of money and a whole lot of power and authority to bring people along with him because he wanted that Marvel magic. What was happening when they brought over Brian Michael Bendis from Marvel Comics? All the characters were being turned gay. There were all kinds of legacy swaps and Mano swaps and all this kind of stuff. Way too many events, way too many variant covers. Oh, Brian Michael Bendis brought over the Marvel magic, didn't he? He basically was the harbinger of everything that's breaking the DC universe now, because apparently DC Rebirth wasn't enough. Satisfying DC fans and having them bought in wasn't enough for anybody over at DC Comics. We've got to be more like Marvel. Well, that shit didn't work out. Brian Michael Bendis put a big time hurt on Superman as a character, destroying those Peter J. Tomasi and Dan Jurgens stories that they were telling. You know, that Oz story never got paid off. All the wonderful character work being put into John Kent and Clark Kent as a father, none of it paid off because Brian Michael Bendis couldn't understand or relate to having an 8-year-old son, apparently. He needs to be 17. Let's put him on a planet and have him tortured essentially by an evil version of his father for 9 years straight. Wonderful storytelling, really fits into the motif of DC Comics. And I'm not saying DC doesn't do dark stuff, but when they've done dark stuff in the past, you know, outside of Batman, because he's always kind of dark, it always felt special. It felt impactful. It felt different. Because that's not normally how DC Comics are portrayed, the DC Comics heroes themselves. And it always felt special. Nothing feels special about DC Comics anymore. There's nothing special about their heroes because they went out there, they brought in Brian Michael Bendis, he brought in a league of jabronis along with him, destroyed the line, and they've continued down on this path. Brian Michael Bendis is long gone. You know, he fucked up the Justice League, he fucked up the Legion of Superheroes, he fucked up Superman, went on his way after Event Leviathan and all that crap that never worked because he never fit at DC Comics. What do they do after that? Let's go hire all the failed Marvel Comics leftovers we can get our hands on. Whoa, Teenie Howard's not working out on X-Men and is failing across the line? Let's bring her in and put her on Harley Quinn and Catwoman. Great idea. Jackson Lanzig and Colin Kelly have never sold a book in their life. We need to bring them over. We need some of that Marvel magic. Matthew Rosenberg is done boring Marvel fans. They don't want anything to do with him anymore. We're going to replace James Tynion with Matthew fucking Borzenberg. And you wonder why nothing is working right now because you have terrible creative. You have no identity. There is nothing about DC Comics that feels like DC Comics for the most part. It is depressing being a DC Comics guy going in there and seeing the state of the universe. At this point, they fucked up so bad that it probably doesn't even matter if DC Comics get better because they've really ruined the sales. They bottomed out. We've seen where they rank in the sales charts. It doesn't look good for DC anymore. You know, there are a lot of indie books that are outselling every title at DC other than Batman. And that's not a good place to be. They should have some mainstays in the top 10. They've got one at this point. If the DCU under James Gunn fails and it doesn't work again, we saw what happened with the DCEU that couldn't get the DC universe right, couldn't get to the heart of it. Superman himself fucked that up right out the gate. Never worked. If James Gunn cannot get the DCU right with Superman out the gate, I do think DC Comics are going to be in some real trouble because at that point, what is it worth? You can make some Batman movies. Other than that, they've got no proven winners on the roster. They can't get a Superman movie right. They can't get a Flash movie right. They can't get a Green Lantern movie right. Wonder Woman they got right once, failed at another time. Aquaman at this point feels like a fluke. If they have more failure there, DC Comics becomes less and less valuable because it's no longer that IP farm. It's no longer that idea farm for this big shared universe because it got too expensive and too much failure. They lost too much money on it. A lot of this stuff is riding on James Gunn and the success of the DCU. And I could definitely see a world where DC Comics maybe gets sold. People buy out the licenses to do Batman or Superman or whatever while they maintain the rights to make the movies and all that kind of stuff. Nobody wants to do the Stan Lee Marvel thing where they sold the rights to their characters to movie studios to fund some rounds of stuff. But DC Comics could be in a very, very bad place. DC Comics as an entity might not be worth continuing, might not be sustainable if the movies and stuff aren't generating money. It might just be something that doesn't look all that valuable anymore. And I think we're getting there because DC doesn't have an identity. They've basically run off their fans trying to become Marvel Comics, and Marvel Comics ran off their fans, but Marvel Comics already had more fans. They had more leeway, and DC Comics were seeing the bottom drop out. And as a DC fan, it fucking sucks. It blows. It's I don't know. At some point, you start taking it personally. You're like, my goodness, why does this keep happening? And nothing is getting better at DC Comics. It's absolutely insane. Jim Lee, love him. Great artist. He was a good businessman at one point. He's nothing anymore. He's just a dude waiting to move on with his life. And hopefully David Zaslav and some people out there give him the opportunity to do that and say, hey, listen, this isn't working out. We need new ideas. We need somebody that has a vision for DC Comics, because it's clearly not you. And, it's tough to talk about this kind of stuff. But it's stuff that is definitely weighing on my mind, especially for these last 6-7 weeks. 8 weeks have been really, really tough. It's been hard to be excited about comic books with everything that's happened and the state of Marvel and DC just being so bad. But we do have lots more conversations about comic books. If you would like more stuff like this, more intense, in-depth conversation about DC and Marvel, I do want to invite you to go over to the Patreon. You can support us there. And we have lots of podcasts available every single day of the week. If you haven't checked out the Patreon, there's a link in the video description.